Looks like I'm going home early today.
Disney and Pixar films don't need much introduction. Stories of singing princesses, adorable teddy bears, cooking rats, dysfunctional families, and even anthropomorphic vehicles have been entertaining kids, and kids at heart, for generations. Yet, in recent years, their reputation has gone, admittedly, somewhat downhill. And while there are many reasons put on the table for this change in public opinion, one of the most compelling is the lack of villains in many modern animated movies. And with the latest release in Pixar's lineup, Elemental, this idea is on the table once more. The movie is adorable, well animated, and fun, but it has one fatal flaw holding it back: a lack of compelling conflict that clashes with the impressive action and animation. It seems like it's been ages since we saw a truly evil villain in a Disney movie. I'm Keefe Nossi with Wicked Binge, and today we're asking, what's up with modern animation's lack of villains? To answer this, we have to start with answering a different question. What makes a great villain? The answer obviously varies depending on who you ask. Some people prefer a villain with a sympathetic side, but others prefer more of a pure evil approach. A perfect example to discuss both of these at once is my personal favorite Pixar villain, Lotso Huggenbear from Toy Story 3. Lotso does fall into the category of twist villains, a category which many feel is particularly overused in modern Pixar films, but he's one of, if not the best, twist villains in terms of execution.
We're all just trash, waiting to be thrown away.
Lotso's given a tear-jerking backstory, having been lost by his owner and replaced with an identical toy once he finally returns. This heartbreak makes us feel for Lotso, but even though it's what twisted his mindset to believe toys were meant to be played with and eventually thrown out, it doesn't excuse his cruelty. He uses his influence to keep other toys underneath him, allowing them to be mistreated by younger children, while he himself and his minions are given considerably nicer treatment from the other children. In the end of the movie, Lotso's even given a chance at redemption when Andy's toys team up to get out of the furnace, but after they trust him to press a button to stop the conveyor belt with the push of a button, he abandons them, cementing himself as a truly evil villain despite a fleshed out sympathetic side. Yet, while oftentimes the best villains have both ends of the spectrum, there's also a charm to pure unsympathetic evil. Claude Frollo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame is a villain who shows no redeeming qualities over the course of the film, and no shortage of absolutely despicable ones. It makes us sympathize with the heroes all the more, and makes his ultimate defeat extremely satisfying. It's ironic that the Man of God was defeated by an act of God. He was the furthest thing from a righteous man and had no right to be proud of himself. Even outside the realm of Disney, there are some great villains in animation who fall into both categories. There are other movie villains like Kingpin from Into the Spider-Verse, cartoon villains like Ice King from Adventure Time, and even anime villains like Chrollo Lucifer and the Phantom Troop from Hunter x Hunter, all of which blend genuinely evil threats with sympathetic origin stories and motives. On the other end, there are completely unsympathetic figures of pure evil, like Jack Horner from Puss in Boots 2, Mr. Burns from The Simpsons, and Muzan Kibutsuji from Demon Slayer. Villains often elevate the series they come from to legendary status, and sometimes people could argue they're the best parts. Heck, we're wanting to take a break and go watch Hunchback of Notre Dame now, but we'll keep the discussion going. Well, unfortunately, as much as we love discussing memorable villains, we also have to look at the other end of the spectrum. What makes a villain fall flat? Well, any realm of animation has underwhelming or downright bad villains, but looking specifically at modern Disney movies, they can sometimes be far too predictable. This is where we go back to the earlier discussion of twist villains. A good twist villain is great. We mentioned Lotso earlier, but modern Disney movies have some pretty good ones, like Ernesto de la Cruz from Coco, whose connection to Hector and ultimate villainy was actually pretty surprising. We felt the same sting of betrayal that Coco did on our first viewing. But for every villain who does this archetype well, there's one that just does not. Hans from Frozen is one example. Frozen is, by all accounts, a decent movie, but Hans is definitely its weakest point. He has a little love song with Anna at the beginning, then towards the end it's just like, oh yeah, he's evil, guys. Haha, I didn't see that coming, right? But given the low threat level Hans had, and the lack of any considerable character development, we just didn't really care. And that's sadly an issue with a lot of modern villains. Pure evil villains don't need a major sympathetic side, necessarily, but any villain needs to offer a threat that's synonymous with the work's tone, and for a movie, something you pay good money to watch on a big screen, an underwhelming villain or conflict can really drag it down. But we do want to acknowledge that, as odd as this sounds, not every movie needs a villain. If you need an example, just look at the cuddliest teddy bear around. No, not you, Lotso. We're talking about one that isn't a fascist dictator. Winnie the Pooh. He's a childhood staple beloved by kids and adults alike. Who doesn't love Pooh Bear and his adventures? They're lighthearted and fun, and while there are conflicts, they're lighter than what you'd see in movies like The Incredibles, but that's perfectly fine. When your movie is just a cute story about stuffed animals in a forest, your conflict being Winnie the Pooh getting his butt stuck in Rabbit's doorway is perfectly reasonable. And why is that? Simply put, it matches the movie's tone. A lighthearted movie can get away with a light conflict as long as it isn't building up to anything more. This is equally true in coming-of-age movies like Turning Red and Inside Out, which don't really have villains aside from general problems of puberty and growing up as a whole. With that, we have to conclude that what's more important than a great villain is a fitting, well-executed conflict. Sometimes this is a villainous figure like Lotso, Chef Skinner, Syndrome, Frollo, Ursula, etc. Other times, it's just a general problem that needs solving, but either way, conflict needs to be there and executed in a way that fits the movie. Therein lies the return of Elemental to the discussion. Spoilers, obviously, but we're going to be talking about Elemental, comparing it to another Disney movie with lower stakes conflict, Encanto. A lot of fans on the surface level seem to like both movies, yet looking deeper into it from a critical standpoint, whether it's more critical fans or legitimate critics, Elemental was much less well received than Encanto. Now, why is that? Well, let's look at the main conflict of each. In Encanto, the main conflict revolves around generational trauma. Mirabel is treated as an outsider in the Madrigal family, receiving less attention and respect, particularly from her abuela Alma. The movie's story is relatively simple. A family is gifted with magic and helps its community with it. Traumatized deeply by the death of her husband, Alma refuses to let her family fail, putting far too much pressure on them to practically carry their community, and upgrade that to literal carrying for Luisa. At the end of the day, she's painted as a sympathetic character despite the trauma she inflicted on her family, which could easily work against the movie. However, it fits with the movie's themes of redemption. Family outcast Bruno is allowed a place in his family once again, leading to a redemption of his status, and in the same way, matriarch Alma is offered a redemption of character by lessening the responsibility on her family's shoulders. The house's destruction before others help rebuild it is a beautiful metaphor for this. On the other end of the spectrum, we have Elemental. Now remember, this is the last chance to avoid spoilers. For all the great qualities Elemental has, its conflict, or lack thereof, brings it down. From the very beginning, Bernie and Cinder's prejudice against water people is built up. Others harass them, treating them as monsters and diluting their culture. This would seemingly lead to quite the spat between them, especially for Bernie and his daughter, and even more so her new love interest, Wade, who is a water person. This would seemingly paint Bernie as the movie's antagonist, or at least the vessel of its conflict. But nope. He interacts with Wade in 3 scenes total, one of which is just a comic relief segment, and the others of which they say less than 2 words to each other. The conflict between fire and water people was built up through a few flashbacks, but it never comes to a head, and that makes the movie feel anticlimactic, even though I found it at least enjoyable. So here's a verdict. As far as the question of whether a good movie is dependent on a good villain, it really depends on the genre. But in most movies we discussed today, we'd say no. There are fondly remembered movies without utterly evil villains, like Winnie the Pooh and Inside Out, as well as movies that aren't saved by having threatening or evil antagonists. Remember The Good Dinosaur? Yeah, me neither, but it had an evil villain. That said, while a good movie isn't necessarily dependent on a good villain, it's absolutely dependent on a good and fitting conflict. Without a good conflict, a movie can fall apart, going from something potentially fantastic to something unremarkable. Really? Elemental is what inspired this discussion for us. The movie has well-written characters and incredible animation. Seriously, Wade's movement is downright mesmerizing, but its lack of conflict makes it, while sweet, very underwhelming, and it's reasonable to wonder if this is going to be a recurring theme. Honestly, in my book, Elemental could have been one of Pixar's best movies if the conflict wasn't treated as such an unimportant, on-the-side detail. But before we end this video, we've got just one more question to ask. Why does modern animation lack evil villains, at least compared to previous eras? It seems unapologetically evil villains are continually harder to come by. We have a few theories, and we want to emphasize that these are just theories coming from our own opinions, so please don't hesitate to agree or disagree. One theory we have is that Disney and other studios are trying to ride the success of movies with lower stakes conflicts. The success of Inside Out, despite its lack of any particularly villainous characters apart from Joy, who's simply the embodiment of toxic positivity, may have inspired them to continue the trend of less pure evil threats in movies. This might work in some cases, like Encanto, but when you do away with major conflict as a whole, things become forgettable. Another thing we've noticed is that perhaps there's a fear of growing stale. Maybe in the minds of Disney, pure evil is old news, and audiences will get bored of villains being purely evil. But honestly, the most memorable and iconic Disney villains are those kinds, however sympathetic or utterly irredeemable they might be. Branching out from just Disney, think about evil characters from long-running series. We'll go with two that just about everyone will recognize: Plankton from SpongeBob SquarePants and Stewie Griffin from Family Guy. Earlier seasons portrayed both of these two as lovable, pure evil characters, always bouncing off of their respective series' sense of humor with a twinge of sadism. From Plankton enslaving Bikini Bottom to Stewie's schemes to kill his own mother, both were hilarious and we could laugh both with and at them. Over the years, they've both changed. Plankton is a bit more sympathetic, caring for his pet Spot and Karen, and Stewie is basically just a walking gay stereotype. Many people still like both of them, us absolutely included, but the dilution of their pure evil nature could very well be due to a worry over becoming repetitive. But, ironically, many find the more low-scale conflicts in modern animation to be repetitive as well. But that's about all we have to say on the matter. We'd love to see more pure evil villains in Pixar and Disney's future films, but ultimately we just want more good conflict. Make us feel stuff again, darn it, and as for you guys, make us know how you feel in the comments.